with the basics of Renaissance theories. Şuna gidelim. Evet. This is the last slide I showed you last week. Here it is, the facade of Ospedale degli Innocenti, Hospital of the Innocents, by Filippo Brunelleschi, beginning of the 15th century. The purpose I inserted this slide was to define the way Renaissance architects introduced geometry into their designs. They occupied mostly with squares and cubes and circles, since they regarded those geometrical forms as perfect centers and how can I say, circumscribed centers with the lines of a square or a cube or a circle altogether fascinated them, and they based proportions upon measurements introduced into squares and cubes, and those measurements here of the lines forming a square, for example, here, can be reflected upon this elements of the composition, this height of the column, width between the columns, and at the back this bay in all its unit in its formation of a unit at the background altogether presents us with calculations based upon proportions and geometrical forms. Now, let me go on with this main interest in proportions, geometry, and in general, an architecture based upon symmetry and centers. Let me introduce you with buildings to illustrate these basics. The early period of Renaissance, 15th century, named Quattrocento, 1400s. Then what we have here in Renaissance period, basically two phases, early Renaissance and late Renaissance, followed by a period of Mannerism. I will be dealing with those three periods, one after the other. Here we have, let me eliminate this floating meeting controls. Here we have the Sagrestia Vecchia, Old Sacristy, and San Lorenzo Church by, again, the same architect, Filippo Brunelleschi, where he introduced his design criteria. For example, in the Sagrestia Vecchia, yani Old Sacristy, here we have it, a central circle of the dome and the square walls altogether create a perfect centralized a small church, I would like to tell, but it's not a small church. It's something smaller than a church that I couldn't remember the name for that. I was on the left. On the right, we have the church with its nave at the center. You see, at the background is the domed transept. Here it is. Here it is, and the apse section, choir. We have side chapels based upon this great proportion introduced by Renaissance theoreticians. But remember, in Gothic architecture, Proportions also regarded very, very important. And specifically in basilica architecture, the relationship between height and width, units and central transept altogether regarded design shaping elements. And there we had in Gothic architecture, specifically after 13th century, we had a system based upon true proportions. In a similar way, in Renaissance, we have buildings greatly designed after proportions. What differs here probably is introduction of square and circle as main elements. For example, in this chapel on the left, we have the square in a way determining the great concept of this chapel. This is the word for small church, chapel. This chapel is designed with the square in mind and a dome at the top. A domed cube altogether is new. I mean, it separates Gothic concept of a basilica with arcades. But it also exists there in the Renaissance period. Basilicas continued to be constructed since churchmen asked this from designers. Basilica was almost consecrated as a prayer space, as a building for prayer by churchmen, by ecclesia. The Basilica of Santa Maria del Santo Spirito, again by Filippo Brunelleschi, introduces us with a modular system. The central square domed transept section is the module, and the other zones are multiplication of this central square. It's division into 4 halls. Division into 4 halls, I mean, introduce us with the units in the aisles. 1/4 of the central square gives us every unit on the right of the nave in the aisles. There is a great proportional understanding here, which takes these monuments back to Greek architecture. Actually, we cannot say that proportional system employed in Renaissance is an innovation, since it existed before in Gothic architecture. What might have changed then? Might have been changed from Gothic to Renaissance understanding of proportions. Huh? Anybody here who would like to reply me? Bekliyorum öğrencilerden. In your opinion, what might have changed, in the understanding of proportional system? What is the difference between a Gothic cathedral and its interior, which is more of earthly, more of centralized, when contrasted, of course, with the Gothic examples? Instead of taking you up to the heavens, it maybe doesn't take you down, but at least create a balance between up and down. It is not maybe earthbound as Romanesque, but still we have something that relays it to the ground. The proportional system then changed. The elements of the proportional system, the scales, changed. The mean between the height, and the width changed. This is the reason why we have a new architectural system introduced in Renaissance, which is different than the one which prevailed in Gothic. This system is mostly based upon how can I say, more logical interrelations between different elements. I don't really know, the quantity, the numerical system of Renaissance proportions. I should check it. This is important, in my opinion. But when I study Gothic proportional system, I can at least say this, that there is this great difference between the proportional system used in Gothic and used in Renaissance. I can only say this at this moment. What is different here then is not non-existence of a proportional system before Renaissance, but the way this proportional system formed is different in Renaissance. Let's go on with this idea in our mind and try to understand Gothic Renaissance designs better. Renaissance almost initiated with a great construction event by Filippo Brunelleschi. In Florence, a cathedral initiated in the end of the 13th century. This is the age of Gothic. But the difference of this monument from the earlier Gothic structures was the introduction of a very, very big central piece, the transept dome. It turned out to be a great single dome instead of being a part of the system of walls surrounding it. Now it is 45 meters wide, 45 meters wide from one side to the other. Really big, almost the size of Pantheon, even exceeds it. Pantheon is 40 meters. 45 meters is very, very big. And the height, 54 meters feet above the ground. And 54 meters feet diyor ya. Bu feet nereden çıktı? 54 meters. You should eliminate this feet. I don't know how it is remained there. Meters yani. Oh my God. The problem was to introduce a dome over this span. Nobody could solve this. But another problem is that why did they challenge, intending to introduce a dome of such measures? I mean, in an environment, no designer, no architect was available to realize this. This is maybe a greater problem than the problem of inserting a dome like this. Then you understand that, or you could comment upon this reality that at that time, they were looking for what can I say, for difference, for novelties. Architectural construction came to an end, maybe reached to a limit in terms of the design introduced beforehand in relation to the technology employed. Technology developing, solutions introduced in different fields, from mathematics to construction techniques. And they just challenged and, were looking ways to introduce a larger dome. Economically, technologically, they thought and they came to the point that they could realize a big dome, a really big dome. But who would do that? Who would do that? Was still a question, not replied. But they reached to this point of, introducing a substructure for a dome to be inserted at the top. Probably some people tried or came to the front and showed themselves, asserting that I can design it, but failed. Probably this happened. I don't know really what happened at this stage. But at the end, Brunelleschi, later, time passed, and this space remained as such without a dome, this gap at the middle. And at the end, Brunelleschi ended up building the dome. One of the greatest problems was to introduce scaffolding. With the technology of the time, it was very difficult. Brunelleschi's solution was to build the dome without employing scaffolding. He proposed that the bricks should be laid in a way unnecessitating use of a scaffolding. Then he introduced a new technique. The only technological innovation would be to construct, lifting mechanisms for the stones, bricks to be raised from the ground to the level of the dome. This also was designed by Brunelleschi, and this named three-speed hoist, named yani kaldıraç in Turkish we say, invented by him, provided that the material be lifted up and used for the construction of the dome. Then first invention to realize this dome was to build three-speed hoist instead of scaffolding system in order to send material to top. Another innovation introduced by Brunelleschi was to introduce a double-shelled dome instead of single-shelled one, a double-shelled dome. And this technique was known in the East, in Iran, in Central Asia. Double-shelled domes are widely known, like Olcay Tostumb in Iran or others. And scholars even find, or origins in the East, in the Orient, for the construction of this dome, brick construction. He introduced herringbone pattern laying of the bricks, in the inner shell. And the other dome simply served as a wind-resisting covering. A lantern crowned the dome, and this dome put there after Brunelleschi died. This is the information provided here, which is not much important. Yeah, there is an oculus at the center with a lantern dome at the top. You can see ribs constructed and the herringbone pattern bricks, unfortunately not shown here, but they must have been shown here. Maybe here you can, but this is not the bricks inside. This is the ceramic cover at the top. Anyway, this is the technique employed by Brunelleschi and regarded a great innovation at the time, since this size of a dome could have been built by brick by himself. And actually this concept of a great centralized centerpiece, a transept dome, regarded as an innovation. No other almost single domed church existed before. Since this dome dominates in a way the basilica, here we have the basilica extending nave, you can see. This dome is so dominant, so superior, that this church, Florence Cathedral, turns out to be a great rotunda instead of basilica. You see the beginning of Renaissance. So simple. And then two aspects. One is technological, the enhancement of technology in the 15th century, starting from the end of 13th century, finalized in the 15th century, middle of the 15th century, when they could now invent devices to lift the material, and also a technique to lay the bricks of the dome without using scaffolding, because scaffolding really was a troublesome construction at that time, very difficult and also dangerous. And those two inventions, one are more maybe architectural, constructing bricks. The other is more of engineering, constructing this lifting system, which is named 3-speed hoist altogether. And the concept, a great centralized building, a central dome, which is 40 meters in diameter. This notion altogether heralds Renaissance, initiates Renaissance. Or historians say so, I don't know. You can maybe only relate it to technological development. But, in the 15th century, Rinascimento, değil mi? Neydi? Rinascimento muydu? Bakalım şuna ne diyorlardı? Ben de unutuyorum valla. Rinascimento muydu İtalyancası? İtalyanca bilmediğim için. Fransızca biliyorum da İtalyanca bilmiyorum. Rönesans Fransızcası neydi? Rinascita. Rebirth. Rinascita. This consciousness existed in the 15th century. Almost the same time when Brunelleschi's, değil mi? Florence Cathedral dome completed, middle of the 15th century, and this term invented. This correspondence is also very, very interesting. Intellectuals of the country understanding something is coming, by means of technological developments and changing design concepts in relation to it. Architecture is technology ya. Vallahi. Kesinlikle. Evet. Onun için interdisipliner olmak çok önemli. Disiplinler arasılık. This is very, very important. Interdisciplinary approach. Transferring knowledge from other fields to the center. Evet. Pazzi Chapel, again by Brunelleschi. According to Alberti, circle and centralized plan were religious symbols and eluded divine. I mean, this is Alberti's view. But this view appeared in the Renaissance in the 15th century, not before. Circle and centralized plan regarded now almost sacred. And in Pazzi Chapel, Brunelleschi tried with, again, a great dome sitting upon a room of rectangular shape, but pay attention. This rectangle is obtained with these exedras, right and left, arched exedra-like projections, right and left. But the main idea is to have a centralized domed square here, as you can see. But when you introduce a dome, there is something appears which might spoil your design. What is that something? A projection. You see, a projection at the top. But why should then this projection be added to this central space? Since it spoils really the balance obtained here between the elements. On the horizontal axis, here it is, there is a balance. But when you put a central axis, which is vertical, Now, new relationships needed to be, in a way, reconciled. What is this to be reconciled? I mean, this is the great problem of the Renaissance artist and designer in general. I mean, in order to bring together contrasting elements, horizontal and vertical, this problem did not exist before in Greek architecture. Since dome was not used so widely, even not at all. Dome first appeared in Roman architecture, finalized in Hagia Sophia, again introduced in Renaissance. For what reason? Why should we occupy ourselves so much with the dome and insist to have it in relation to the building? Huh? That's a great question. Is it because of Oriental tradition? I mean, Hagia Sophia and its repercussions, and there are Ottoman domes that existed, or earlier architecture, Ilhanite architecture in Iran with Olcaytus, tomb architecture with domes. Altogether, they're contemporary with these early Renaissance periods. I don't know, really, I don't know. But one point further than this problem creating case is that this vertical axis introduction of a dome also introduces a potential in contrast to the horizontal development of the facade. Then you have a new element at the top, a vertical element, which introduces at the center a kind of void, as you can see here, in this great arch, with the dome at the top in relation to that, introducing a division of the facade into two halves, right and left. You see symmetrical division of the facades, right and left. This creates a movement, a rhythm, in a way, between the elements. I would like to go on with this later on, but now just check I don't want to use the term difference, but variation, diversification introduced by Patricepal. Here we have Parthenon on the left in Athens, Greek temple Parthenon. Pay attention, this vertical element is non-existent here. You see columns supporting an entablature and a pediment at the top altogether introduces us single elements brought together, but well proportioned. These are put in relation to each other, not integrated as in architect Sinan's designs, not interrelated by different elements, but everything in its individuality brought together. There is a general system of proportions and put within this system. And in this, there is no dominating, integrating single idea. While here in Patricepal, you can sense the predilection of the architects to introduce a dominating element. If this dome would be there without being related to the facade, you wouldn't tell this. Just suppose that a dome is added here. Just a dome is added here without any relationship provided between the facades. Just a dome. And this exists in Gothic architecture. Just a dome, transept dome at the center. A transept dome is then a step further than Greek temple. Greek temple has no dome. You put a dome at the top and regard the dome as one of the elements, like a supporting column. You could introduce it in a proportional system, let it be related to the building in an appropriate way, but you don't intend to relate this dome to the lower structural system, lower elements. While, for example, in Pantheon in Rome, Pantheon, 2nd century Rome, this is 5th century Athens, this is 2nd century Rome. This had been done. A great dome, a pedimented facade with columns, everything in its individual existence, independent state, contributes to the creation of a single monument. In Hagia Sophia, we have these half domes, east and west. In a way, on their sides, relate the dome to the lower structural system and to the other elements. But on the north and south, this is not there. It is non-existent. And there is an narthex and buttresses preventing this integration. But in Pazzi Chapel, maybe modeled upon buildings like Hagia Sophia, you see this great arch in relation to the central dome. Designer would like to relate this central dome to the lower zone by means of this vertical axis, this line separating the facade into two halves. You see, in a way, would like to introduce a dominating verticality, which is dome and the elements relating it to the facade. Which are these elements? This great arch, this great gate with the pediment altogether. You see, this is new. This is entirely new. An intention to introduce a vertical axis with a great dome dominating. You see, dominating. You substitute, how can I say, the other elements are substitutes. Other elements are now parts of this integration of this unit. And since this is a centralized building, at least this part underneath the dome and the arch in the facade altogether give us a sense of really integration. Though the side wings here, right and left, these arched, etc., like projections, spoil this understanding. There are no connecting elements, for example, half domes, scrolls, and volutes, so forth. I mean, connecting the central projecting dome to these side wings. Since at that time, designers could not maybe introduce them, since volutes or half domes are spherical and how can I say, whirling, convoluting forms, which were not liked by Renaissance intellectuals. Renaissance intellectuals looked for plain, simple, geometrical forms. They couldn't introduce intermediary elements. I mean, non-angled, how can I say, what else? Unconforming, elements to relate the central body to the wings, yeah? What then, let me summarize, we face here a central element dominating for the first time architectural design appeared with Brunelleschi. And Pazzi Chapel is a great example. Compare it with this Gothic cathedral, with a central dome. You don't even see the dome at the center. There is a great tower hiding it. In Split, Gothic Cathedral is closer to Pantheon, into Pantheon and Parthenon. In Split, Pazza Chapel is closer to Hagia Sophia. Probably we should regard Hagia Sophia one of the backgrounds of Renaissance architecture, maybe even more prominent than local Roman inheritance in Rome. Another architect, Sangallo, at the end of the 15th century, realized potentials of Brunelleschi's architecture and designed Santa Maria delle Carceri. This building develops on a Greek cross plan, as you see, centralized concept of a centralized building is again here. Those projections all over the four sides with pediments introduce us with a classical element, which is a basilica, as if on every side a basilica extends, but in reality, no. They are very, very, how can I say, small, very narrow, and in a way it looks like a rotunda again, with four projections, arched projections. Greek cross plan, developed in again Orient in Byzantine architecture, reflected and experienced in Italy by this architect. When you look at inside, again, what we have, işte, rectangles, circles, squares, and so forth. One point which strikes eye is the correlation between inner design of the walls and the other, but up to a point, not further. For example, this arch and the other one over here are not reflected up and outside. You see, pediments hide the background, even the dome itself. Though these corner pilasters repeated outside, and this cornice here also repeated outside altogether, create a potential for integration, but up to a point, as I told you, we don't have the great integration introduced by architect Sinan in his Süleymaniye here. This central square taken as a model, and half of the square is created in the four wings, four arms of the cross, as you can see here. Then Renaissance proportions are basically there. Alberti's Tempio Malatestiano, San Francisco Church, displays as Roman influence with this triumphal arch, triple organization of arcs, pediment, architrave. At the back of this facade, we have a typical basilica, nave and aisle roofs. Altogether, features of medieval age are there. We have a transept dome. This monument is unfinished. And what we have today is the photograph on the left. When you look at this photograph, we understand that really Renaissance designers occupied themselves with Roman architecture, created probably drawings of the Roman ruins and introduced them, elements, into the architecture they created. Again, what we have here, a design based upon classical proportions. Individual elements are here and there, but the idea of having a central axis differentiated in relation to the dome at the background, and pay attention, another arch probably intended to be done here, which couldn't be finished. Then there is a great central axis, a vertical axis in relation to the dome at the background. Then Renaissance architects from the beginning would like to balance horizontal and vertical developments of the monument, and central dome as a dominating element is regarded in relation, is taken in relation to this idea of vertical axis. Let me repeat. From Pazzi Chapel by Brunelleschi to this Tempio Malatestiano by Alberti, essentially what we have here, this dominating elements altogether, emphasized in relation to the other parts of the design. Bunu asla unutmamanızı rica ediyorum yani. I ask you to remind you this to yourselves. I mean, this is one of the basic ideas of Renaissance system. Maybe I told you before this, architectural innovation is totally based upon innovation of system. You don't innovate elements. Elements are always same. İşte ne diyorsunuz değil mi? Kolon ve kiriş. Kolon ve kiriş. Column and architrave. Post and architrave. Post and lintel. Değil mi? Kolon ve kiriş. Architecture is always kolon ve kiriş yani. You can never change this reality. You always have post and lintel. From the most modern to the most primitive architecture, you have the colon and kirish system. But this is not a system. I mean, I failed. This is not a system. This is the elements. What makes architectural design original is the originality of the system. If you have an original system, then you have an original architecture. So simple, but also very difficult, of course. Systems are brought about by what? Architects, of course, partly by architects, because architects are the doers, makers, but partly by technological development. Altogether, architects understanding technological developments contribute to the development of the systems. They themselves introduce systems with new technological devices. Also, let me tell you that changing culture had an impact upon this. Changing culture had an impact upon this. I mean, social systems also change, değil mi? Governorship, centralized rule, and so forth. Also introduced dominating element, maybe. Dominating elements in this example, we have it, can be related to the changing social system in Italy in the 15th century. We should look for that. We can relate architects' announced integration to 16th century Ottoman social and administrative system, for sure. But I don't really know 15th century Italy. We should check the roles played by the elements in the social system in relation to the roles played by the elements in architectural systems. Oh my God, Alberti. Basilica of Santa Maria Novella. Alberti here attempted to bring the ideals of humanist architecture, proportion and classically inspired detailing. Ama bu arada saatimiz geçmiş. Şimdi baktım saate. Kusura bakmayın. Biraz geç başlamıştık ama I think it is time to give a break here since, you know, though we started late, we already passed 5 minutes. And I hope this is time to give a break for refreshments. 10 minutes. We can meet a quarter to 11. Quarter to 11. Bye-bye. I just inserted a passage from Francesco Colonna, a Renaissance theoretician. He indicates that one idea was to be of chief importance in all building. The parts are to be subordinated to the main feature, principe, and further that the parts must conform by means of proportionality and symmetry. Proportionality and symmetry. Bunu şey yazmışım, yanlışlıkla hızlı yazdım. Evet. Colonna underlines this notion of chief importance, which is the central piece. And the parts must be subordinated to this central idea. This Renaissance theory openly introduces us with this design principle, which started in the 15th century. Pazzi Chapel is a good case to illustrate it. Now, Alberti's Basilica of Santa Maria Novella. Alberti attempted to bring the ideals of humanist architecture, proportion, and classically inspired detailing to bear on the design while also creating harmony with the already existing medieval part of the. Şimdi, Alberti is the theoretician who attached maybe greatest significance to proportions and harmony. We know this. And this task was given to him, which was to reconstruct the facade of an existing church. The existing church was a basilica, a typical basilica of aisles and a central nave. This idea of harmonious relationships between the parts, proportions, and so forth, altogether shaped mentality of Alberti, and he approached to this facade with those in his mind. He could not maybe leave the central piece, the great projection outside, without being related to the side sections, the aisles, the roof of the aisles, and he introduced for the first time this idea of volutes, S-curved volutes, which is regarded as the beginning of later Baroque. Now we are in the 15th century, but an element widely employed in Baroque for the first time experienced. Scholars find here a kind of initiator of later Baroque principles of design, not only in applying a single Baroque element here, but also this general approach to design understanding. Introduction of a dominating element and the problem of relating it to the others. Relating it to the others. One idea should dominate. At the same time, it must be a part of the whole. I mean, this is a very interesting issue. Here we have, you introduce a dominating element, the dome, and try to relate it to the other parts. In this case, we don't have maybe a dome, but a great pedimented projection like this, and horizontal lines created together with the verticality of the central part. But these are so distinct, the vertical projection and the horizontal divisions at the bottom. He would like to relate this central projection to the side ones by means of these volutes. The purpose was to integrate. Simply to say, integrate. To integrate. Elements, horizontal elements, vertical elements, separate, distinct, need to be interrelated by means of this word. Is it successful? Of course not. But it's an experience, a very early experience. The pediment and the frieze are clearly inspired by the antiquity, but the S-curved scrolls in the upper part are new and without precedent in antiquity. The scrolls and variations of them found in churches all over Italy all find their origin here in the design of this church. This is the beginning of this idea of integration, or attempt to integrate horizontal and vertical divisions and relate the central projection to the lower zone. Interior, typical of Gothic, you see, it's an old church, Annie. It's an old church. This pediment here, and this, proportions at this second stage give us a sense of Renaissance, but the proportions at the lower edge in relation to this ripped vaults inside, these elongated pilasters or decorative elements, altogether give us a sense of Gothic. Pediments, rose window, and this great arch altogether are the parts of this vertical projection. These arches and these square coffer-like designs altogether, and the cornices, elements of the horizontal development. Have I been able to give you this or create an understanding of the struggle, the endeavor of the Renaissance designers? I hope I could. I hope I could. And in your mind, maybe some reflections arose, and you can start to think about this very interesting process, really. In Mantua, Alberti designed a church named Basilica of Sant'Andrea, a typical great Gothic church, a basilica. But when you enter inside, you feel like being in a great Roman bath, hammam, a great bath, with etc., coffers in the walls, great rounded arches altogether, you see. Inside is Roman, really Roman. But the system these elements put in is Gothic, a Gothic basilica. But the system here on the facade is Renaissance. This is Roman, this is Gothic, here we have. And here in the facade, we have a new understanding, a new system introduced. What is the elements of this new system? First of all, we have a great square dominating the proportional organization. You see the great square here. This is the great square here. And the central piece, with the vertical development from bottom to top to the apex of this arch. Here we have verticality. In contrast with these horizontal divisions of the facade, you see, and the impact of the pediment, which is totally different in comparison to this circle at the top. System basically grounded in the idea of a dominating central piece, which is this great arch, the apex of the triangle of the pediment and apex of the arch here. Inside we have the great dome, domed central space. The transept dome also introduces us with this main dominating axial development. Here we have. At the back is the dome. You can see the cross at the top of the dome here at the back in relation to this front. Now, then in this early period of Renaissance, we have contradicting systems put together. One is Gothic, the other is Roman, and the other is Renaissance. A hybridity reigns here. In similar to early Ottoman architecture. Remember, in Bursa, İznik, we were dealing with inverted T-type mosques, değil mi? Zaviyeli Cami, convent mosque, where we had Seljuk 4A1 plan, with corner rooms. Also, we traced the impact of Queen Sung's cross and square church type, you know, with the arms opening, east and west. And we had great facades of Byzantine influence, of Byzantine type. What else? We had the Qibla axis. Typical reference to the universal mosque pattern altogether. Different systems juxtaposed there. In a similar way, in early Renaissance, we have different systems brought together. But we were lucky because an architect like Sinan came and synthesized all and created his great harmonious units. Shall we have a similar designer to appear at the end of this process and create a synthesis of this early search for a single system? We will see. We're gonna see. Tempietto by Donato Bramante from 1500s. The idea is a temple derived from Alberti. Alberti named it Templum, which should be an idealized, centralized church. I mean, churchmen asking a basilica, nave and aisles, apse, transept, you know, cross plan. This is Christian, yani. But now, Renaissance intellectual Alberti proposing a circular building to be the ideal church. What a great conflict here. Unbelievable, yani. Renaissance intellectual asking a centralized, circular, rotunda-like building to be the ideal church. It is not Christian. It is the system in his mind, the new system, because he was looking for the perfect proportions, harmonious units, symmetrically disposed elements, and so forth. Oh, I am sorry. This he regarded as true architecture. Then Bramante, borrowing this idea from him, designed a building which never used as a church. But the idea is an ideal church. It is a commemorative martyrium, a tomb where St. Peter crucified, built by Bramante. Is it Renaissance or Roman? Would be a good question, since we have similar Roman rounded buildings, as I taught rotundas. Let's check. Here is an example. The Temple of Vesta, a Roman temple in Tivoli, dating to the early 1st century. You see, a nice arcade supporting a slightly sloping roof, together with a central drum, projecting drum, again covered by a nice roof with a finial. This is a temple, Roman temple from Rome. Probably Bramante analyzed this temple and learned from it, specifically learned to introduce those columns of the arcade. He introduced a balcony, instead of this roof, and instead of this typical, how can I say? I don't know really how to name it. This type of roof, I mean, sloping roof. He preferred a great dome. Oh my God. At this stage, he shows himself as a Renaissance architect. I am a Renaissance architect. I have this great dome dominating the elements. You see, the others. Though in this section, this arcade looks like a self-standing part, not much dominated by the dome, probably because he was so occupied with the Roman design and inflicted by these ideas, I mean, of having elements independently contributing to the general design altogether. He did not go forwards and, in a way, build a greater dome like an umbrella, putting everything underneath it. No, he followed the steps of the Roman architect, and really elements are there. But at least I can say that the dome itself here creates a great verticality, which is not much balanced by any horizontal elements, since this is a circle embracing the central projection, and maybe from this perspective it is subordinate to this central dominating element, specifically this balcony, which is circular. Even the arcade itself, you see how when you go on with the analysis, understanding, you come to the concepts introduced by the architect, the way he related different elements, he put them together. I mean, everything is well taught. Nothing is unconsciously or by chance done. I mean, here we have, yes, a Roman understanding of a separate element, but the form itself, the circular form in relation to this circular core, creates a kind of unity, a kind of integration. See? Not maybe integration of different elements, but very similar, almost same elements give us this sense of integration. Then it is not a challenging building. This is a challenging building. Here we have verticals, horizontals, different sorts of elements you see in relation to them. But here we have only circle. And then you can understand why it is regarded as ideal, because it's simple, plain, and clear design. Everything solved from the beginning. You just introduce a circle and another circle around it, and the dome is up. Very clear, but architects would not remain with these simple solutions. Architects occupied themselves with difficulties, contradicting elements, how to bring them together, juxtapose them, integrate them, relate them, and create potentials for aesthetic enjoyment, originating from contrasts, solids and voids, stages, differentiations, similarities. This is architectural design, architectural design, at least until the 20th century. I don't know. You see, from here, where to where? New system. Evet. Now we are in late period. Cinquecento, they say, 1500s. Late period. 16th century. The age of Sinan. The age of Sinan. Now we have great actors like Michelangelo, Bramante, Pops, who employed them, who commissioned buildings in paying them. This is the age of St. Peter's. It's almost a symbol of Renaissance and later Baroque, since its design and construction lasted very long, and Renaissance ideals and Baroque beginnings and concepts even altogether juxtaposed in the body of this monument. Pope Julius is the main actor who initiated this design in investing to the new building of St. Peter's. Initially, Bramante started the design of St. Peter's. Pay attention, he introduced a typical Renaissance building, a central vertical axis dominated by two domes, balanced with pediments at the second level and the first level. Here we don't have a pediment, but the idea is there, you know, an entablature, a classical idea, then a dome, more of a medieval idea, Hagia Sophia, pediment at the background and a great dome, and two minaret-like towers on the two sides at the end of these two wings, right and left, altogether balancing the central portion. What reminds you this? Of course, Gothic Cathedral yani. Two towers, değil mi? A central piece with arches and gates. You know, işte conical cap of the transept at the background. Instead of the conical cap, we have a great dome modeled after Hagia Sophia, as you can see. So, then what we have, ancient ideals and Renaissance, new Renaissance system altogether, shaping this St. Peter's, at least the facade we see. One feature of Bramante was to introduce a short nave arm. This nave was not as long as the basilica we find today in the place of this model building. As you can see, Bramante's very short arm of the nave. Actually, we don't have a single arm. We have four arms. One contains the apse, which is not drawn here. It must be somewhere. Here it is, you see, I suppose. This is the apse. Greek cross is actually the main design concept here. Greek cross. Ne olmuş buraya sonradan? There is a projection here, a basilica projection. Değil mi? This changed later on. We will be seeing how this changed. There are so many drawings in relation to St. Peter's. This is one of them. But basically, Bramante's idea was that a Greek cross building. Look at this. We have at the center a square on which a cross imposed. Then there is a potential in here, since we have these projections creating angles and introducing a movement outside. You see, it is not a one surface, single dimension facades, but projections introduce potentials for design and also symmetry. There's a great potential in this symmetry, though For some reason, it could be boring, but still, it is pleasing, to have symmetry in terms of these basic forms, cross and square. Also, there's a potential to have rooms between the arms of the cross, topped by domes, each case. I should remind you, Taj Mahal, 17th century Taj Mahal, a similar understanding. Instead of these projecting arms, there are ivans, 4 ivans facing outside. The corner rooms are same, and the idea of having a cross pattern, the idea of Chaharba in Iran, Chaharba, 4 gardens. Here is cross. The similarity is striking, really. Cross and Chaharba, 4 gardens, in relation to this cross. But as I told you before, the idea comes from a cosmological concept, 4 directions, değil mi? 4 directions, east, west, north, south. Cross is a representation of the 4 directions, and these 2 axes, juxtaposed axes, give us the movement of the sun in its course from east to west, değil mi? And swastika, like this, is a direct symbol of these movements of the sun in sky. Anyway, this universal idea of a cross of 4 directions employed in different places in the world, from Middle America to Europe, from Europe to Middle East, from Middle East to Central Asia and India. Possible inspiration source for Bramante's plan was Leonardo da Vinci. In his Atlantic Codex, he introduced architectural studies for the Basilica of St. Peter's. Here it is, you see. A globe inscribed in a circle. This is the centralized plan, which indicates the sphere of water and fire, the cosmological notions as usual, and invested by the breath of wind from Bibliotheca Ambrosiana. This is the image created by Leonardo da Vinci, 15th century. You see how Bramante, Leonardo, Alberti altogether breathed in the same atmosphere of a new culture, of a new society, of new technologies, and so forth. But what happened to Bramante's St. Peter's? Unfortunately, they couldn't finalize it, and travelers like this Maarten van Heemskerk, a Dutch traveler visiting St. Peter's, created drawings of the building in construction. For a time, it even stayed in ruins because it was unfinished. In this slide I created, you can see how a great classicism in the background of Bramante's design existed. Pantheon, you see, with its pediment and arcades. At the back is a dome. But in Bramante's design, the relationship between the elements totally changed. Dome is now dominating, a great dome dominating, and this dynamism between a dominating element and the dominated is essentially a Renaissance idea. Evet. Bramante's design remained short of covering what Pops asked, and this task was given to Michelangelo. I mean, the task to finalize this project in the middle of the 16th century. And Michelangelo introduced great change into the not maybe great, but significant change, let me say as such, into the design of Bramante. Remember, I was talking about the potentials of having such facades with projections. Michelangelo understood it very well. He was uncomfortable with these angled surfaces and, geometrical sharpness of the body. He introduced a great system of covering facade design, you see, in softening the contours, specifically these semicircular projections of the cross, softening them with pilasters like this, you see, and rendering those different elements part of a great facade design, like the Pantheon's circular body. It's not a circular body here, but at least the idea is that, interrelated parts, projections, now interrelated in a different way. This did not exist in Renaissance. Let me go back. Look at these elements. Or that elements. Now in Michelangelo's design, an innovation introduced. And those parts, let me show you outside. You see these angled surfaces are softened by means of a continuum of cornices, you see, combining elements, you see, enveloping them all together. The repeated attached columns, pilasters, altogether create a unity of different elements, identical column capitals, and so forth. Then this contradiction between the arms of the cross and the square, in a way not totally eliminated, but at least softened, at least in a way led to the level of a sculpturesque impact. Michelangelo was a sculptor, and he created human bodies in stone. And human body is a perfect, almost symbol of unity, of function and beauty. And this sculpture couldn't, probably, we are estimating it, couldn't stand of these, how can I say, individual elements, unrelated, and his organic approach to architecture first manifested itself in this design of St. Peter's facade, and regarded as the initiator of Baroque. We employ pilasters, sculptures, and other architectural elements in a well-designed plasticity in order to relate different forms, architectural form. This is the Baroque, essentially a Baroque concept, first initiated by Michelangelo. But it is not regarded a true Baroque, beginning of Baroque, and mostly analyzed under the heading Mannerism, tarzcılık. And Michelangelo is regarded as a Mannerist architect. He had the knowledge of Renaissance ideals, but introduced innovations to it. And his potential as a sculptor greatly contributed to bring elements together in a more integrated way. Remember, integration was the aim. What's the aim? It started with the Renaissance. What's the aim? Michelangelo understood it very well and applied. I will be talking more on this. All right. In Bramantes's design, we have then a cross. In Michelangelo, also we have a cross, and also we have a square. In Bramantes's design, outside, totally different designs, totally different. See, elements underneath a central dome, like in işte Alberti's designs. Formerly, you see here. Sangallo's designs, you see. A dominating dome and pediment. İşte Pazzi Chapel. Dominating dome and arch. When you come to Bramante, you see a dominating dome and a pediment here. Verticality more pronounced than any other element, and the others subordinate to it. In Michelangelo, we have a similar case, a dominating centralized building with a great dome, but the elements, as you can see, are more interrelated to each other. And this convoluting facade is a reference to the circular dome at the center. Inside, we still have this impact of a Roman bat. Bramante's design is there. Nothing much changed. In both Bramante and Michelangelo, we don't have this great basilica nave and aisles here. They didn't like it. They would like to introduce this great centralized building, well proportioned, because they understood that a projection of a basilica would spoil this integration. But unfortunately, later, churchmen decided to add the great arm of the basilica at the front because their use of architectural space of church necessitated it. They couldn't eliminate it. Rituals. Here we have the basilica arm, you see, later added to Michelangelo's design. Old St. Peter's, typical Byzantine basilica, Bramante's St. Peter's, Michelangelo's St. Peter's. Relationships are better provided. Integration is not only outside, but also between those corner sections provided better than Bramante. And Maderno added this arm with nave and aisles in the west. Today's building then is a product of three architects, Bramante, Michelangelo, and Maderno. This facade belongs to Maderno. We don't know original facade designed by Michelangelo, unfortunately. I would like to show you a number of palazzos and villas designed in Renaissance. Palazzo Medici in Florence by Micheletto di Bartolomeo, 15th century, is an early example. We have a great facades of horizontal divisions, as you can see. A Roman type cornice at the top aims to dominate the entire facade. But it is not a verticality here pronounced. Everything develops around horizontals, as you can see. And this monotony of the different levels, identical system of arts altogether, is a specific showcase of the early period, early Renaissance architecture. When you enter inside, a public section contains a courtyard. Entrance is provided by this gate to the courtyard, as you can see. A private section on the right leads you to the rooms used by the owner of the house, Medici family. Public and private zones separated. It looks like classical, traditional Roman domestic settings and Roman houses with atrium and other zones at the back of it. Palazzo Rucellai by Alberti, in a similar way, uses a great cornice at the top, like the one here, dominating, limiting the design at the top. Different orders introduced by Alberti: at the bottom Toscana, at the second level Ionic, at the third Corinthian. In a way, differentiate those zones, horizontal zones, but at the same time interrelate them by means of these pilasters, one above the other. This rhythm credit is nice, but very monotonous, as you can see. Inspiration source is the facades of Colosseum in Rome in a similar way, based upon Toscana, Ionic, and Corinthian levels. You can see how Renaissance architects learning from Roman architecture. This is another case. Palazzo Farnese by Antonio de Sangallo, in a similar way, gives us essentially horizontal developments of the building. Michelangelo added this section at the top later on, this cornice, with triglyphs. You see triglyphs? That would have been in a Greek temple. In northern Italy, Palladio introduced a great villa tradition. This is the topic of the third session today. Let me give a break of 10 minutes. Here we can meet 20 to 12, and share ideas. See you. Palladio, who is the great Renaissance architect of villas in the region named Veneto, he designed and constructed many villas, which are basically compounds, central residence with additional structures like stables in landscape, great open vistas. Provided by the position of the central building, as it is here. Villa Badoer, colonnaded porticos create nice view of the surrounding environment. Typically Renaissance, proportions and organization of the elements give us essential principles of Renaissance architecture. In this case, we have a single portico at the front of a long rectangular room, as kind of sofa. On the right and left of the portico and the central rectangular room, we have great rectangular rooms with windows like this, opening outside. At the back are square rooms, cubicles, and further vestibules between those side rooms and the central central sofa or central hall. Symmetry reigns, as you can see. Symmetry reigns inside and outside. and classical proportions are there. This building embraces gardens at the front by means of those two colonnaded porticos or colonnaded walking quays, as you see, attached to those rectangular multifunctional buildings, right and left. A closer view is as such. You can see the plan here. Staircase leading to the second floor in this plan can be seen. When we were reading on Petrarch and his trekking in nature, we were amazed how he experienced nature in a new and enlarged view of the earth and the universe. His personal approach, personalization of life. Actually, Palladio, villas by Palladio are related to this new attitude in and to nature. In nature, because these villas are in nature, in countryside. To nature, because from these villas, you can envision the environments. Your vista is a symbol of your dominance, of your control over natural habitat, the environments. Of course, gardens is a part of your control, the controlled realm between wild nature and yourself. Then you really create a kind of control point, a kind of counterpoint, actually, not against, but in relation to nature. This is the idea, and scholars usually explain Palladio designs by means of such concepts. Portico is symbolic of this vista, and great staircase leading to it, putting the owner at a dominating position, separating it from nature, and leaving him alone in his endeavors, in his relationship with nature, and so forth. The central, or I don't know really, these are the proportioned rooms after. Oh, this should be the central piece because we have rooms, side rooms, as you can see, right and left with the gates. Rooms are proportioned after whole numbers. This is further information for you. Villa Capra or Villa Rotonda in Vicenza, again by Andrea Palladio, is a nice manor house. This sort of manor houses named by Palladio as Belvedere. He employs this term, Belvedere. These kind of words from architecture history is frequently referred in modern architectural theories, even employed in our daily life. For example, in my suburb here at Çayyolu, I have an Arcadium shopping center. Değil mi? Arcadium. From arcades. What else? We have many others. Değil mi? Hatırlıyor musunuz siz hiç? O kadar çok karşılaşıyorum ki. This sort of architecturalist terminology employed to name shopping centers of today. Ne vardı bakayım? Palladium mesela. Palladium. Palladium. Palladium. Pallas. Athena. There's a title of Athena, goddess Athena, Pallas Athena. Palladium. It should be a different type of, I don't know, building. Anyway, man is the measure. He is at the center in a villa. This is a Renaissance idea, you know, putting man at the center, and the purpose of villa is to put him at the center. There is a rational order imposed on nature then by means of architecture. Then architecture is a medium here. They really used architecture as a medium. Like in Gothic age they did. Architecture for architecture. Art for art neydi o? Art for art's sake. Sanat için midir, halk için midir? Is it art for public or art for art? Is architecture for architecture? Is architecture for society? Kind of thing. It is nonsense, but you know, this came to my mind. Architecture looks like a medium in every case we deal with it. I mean, so functional, of course, not only, you know, for daily functions, but also cultural functions, religious functions. It is really a functional whole. The northwest portico is set onto the hill as determination of a straight carriage drive from the principal gates. Okay, from the gates, you reach to the portico by means of routes. You can use carriages for this purpose. Then from the gates to the villa, you have a microcosmos, like the great streets, highways leading to the villa from the towns around. I mean, the idea is that, you know, Renaissance city, Renaissance villa, Renaissance countryside, altogether, designers shape their environments, be it urban, be it non-urban, after ideals, really ideals. In order for each room to have some sun, the design was rotated 45 degrees from each cardinal point of the compass. This every architect knows. I mean, and it's a good idea. And this is the topic I have just introduced, you know, routes really leading from the gates to the villa. You know, inside gardens, you have an order imposed on nature, really. Bakın Mirandola stated, I have placed you at the very center of the world, so that from that vantage point, and God speaks to Mirandola, so that from that vantage point you may with greater ease glance round about you on all that the world contains. Then, traveling to a villa is the same with trekking in nature. Reach the vantage point and see the environment from there. This is the idea. Şimdi ne görüyorsunuz villalardan? Buralarda var işte bir sürü. Öbür villanın balkonunu. Modern villas in towns. You just see the other villa's balcony or your neighbor. Hello, I'm here inspecting you. You know, how different is the concept? You see, this is villa yani. Öbürleri şey. Ne diyeceğimi bilemedim işte. Gecekondu villa. Mannerism. 16th century, middle of the 16th century and so forth. Tarzcılık. In early Renaissance, we had classical design, you know, Brunelleschi's, proportionals. In High Renaissance, we have a rational order based upon a dominating, you know, vertical units. Kind of issues, but in every case, we have really squares, circles, you know, dominating the design and the relationships between those geometrical forms, proportions based upon scales and so forth. What happens in this age of mannerism? As in St. Peter's facades, now we have a centralization introduced to an angled surface. What I mean is that you have an angled surface here, you see, an angled surface, because it ends at the end here and turns left, disappears there, another order begins there. But here, Michelangelo relates different parts of the facade which should have been angled. Pay attention here. This is angled, you see. This facade, that facade, they stay in their individuality, not related by means of combining elements. But here now, the organization of the facade as well, centralized. Not the building inside, the interior centralized underneath a single dome, but the entire surface now concentric relations has concentric relations, or parts of the facade have concentric relations. Yeah, this is a new trend started with Michelangelo's St. Peter. Look at later Moderno edition at the end of this basilica nave and aisle projection here. He unfortunately lost the sense of the background centralized organization of the surfaces because he couldn't relate it to the background. He didn't have this talents as Michelangelo had. Michelangelo was really a great architect. He understood the times and geographies and led design to a different stage, advanced it. For example, he introduced a great oval instead of a square or circle, a great oval at the center of a compound of buildings, as you can see, trapezoidal. Here we have trapezoidal planning, diagonal placed wings, 2 wings, and a central body with a great facade at the back. Here we have. If he would introduce here a circle or a square, he wouldn't obtain this conformity, this, how can I say, this conciliation between the pavement, between the ground, and the facades on the 2 sides of. I mean, because this, in order introduced by diagonal placements of the buildings here, should have been in a way resolved by means of a ground in relation to them, and he introduced this here, this oval, which is regarded as the initiator of oval planning in Baroque. You see, Campidoglia on Capitoline Hill. This is the name of the building, middle of the 16th century. And in the Medici Chapel, he designed a bibliography named Laurentian bibliography or Bibliotheca Laurentian. You see the interior of it here in this picture. And here in this photograph, you see a staircase in the same complex. B entrance, here it is. B entrance to the Bibliotheca Laurentian. This is the chapel here. A is the chapel, Medici Chapel. Here is the bibliothèque, the library, and the, how can I say, a kind of vestibule. Yes, it's a vestibule in front of the bibliothèque. This is the entrance piece, decorated with a grand staircase. What is significant in this staircase? What Michelangelo did in designing a staircase here. First, let's deal with the staircase. It's better. In the staircase, Michelangelo, in a way, substantiated basically a grand Renaissance idea. What is that? A grand Renaissance idea. This is not a big space. This is a small, modest vestibule, yani. Just a vestibule. It is non-functional. There is no other function than an intermediary space. You pass by it to reach to the library. This is the library here. Second library here. You pass this vestibule to reach to the library. You go on steps of the staircase and reach to this gate. It's so simple. And it shouldn't necessarily be decorated as such. Great decorated to be as such. But this task was given to Michelangelo, and he experienced with the grand Renaissance idea. What is that idea? Of a dominating element. In the church, it is the dome. Here, it is the staircase. This is a Renaissance idea. Let me say it as such. This is a Renaissance idea. A dominating grand element, which is the staircase. People don't approach usually this like me. I mean, they could regard it as a Baroque deformation or as a when I say Baroque ornamental approach and so forth. But since we know now, you and me altogether, we know now that the beginnings of Baroque, the seeds of it planted earlier in Renaissance, this idea of a dominating element and the problem of connecting it to the other elements altogether. Now we can understand how Michelangelo was shaped by a Renaissance intellectual life and proposed this grand staircase in relation to this idea of a dominating element within the whole. Then it's a Renaissance idea. But more than that, one step further, the application of those really exaggerated pediments, but not real pediments, ornamental pediments, pilasters, attached columns underneath them, altogether creating a kind of screen of architectural details. Yani, there are there are walls, of course, there are walls, but walls are almost hidden behind screen of architectural elements. These architectural elements turn out to be a decorative system and create a kind of barrier between you and the walls at the background. Here is a Baroque tendency now, in a way breaking the rigidity of the structural system, hiding it, covering it, you see, turning the entire surface of the room into an ornamental device, you see. And this device is not directly in relation with the staircase, Annie. Staircase is so dominant and individual. I mean, no sign of a direct relationship between these pediments or pilasters. Here is a volute, for example, which does not find a counterpart on the walls. There are no volutes, for example, or any other element directly relating this to that. You see, there are ideas, Renaissance and Baroque ideas, side by side. A hybrid interior. This is Manierism işte ya. You are breaking rules, but using the ideas of the past, introducing new elements. It's a search for innovation. This is Manierism. I mean, I can go further and think with you, interpret these environments to understand what is going on, but it's really time-taking. And I have a schedule to follow. Because really, when I think I discover, and best method of learning is teaching, I know, and everybody knows this, but I cannot go beyond this. I hope I have been able to give you the main idea here. I hope so. I hope so. Look at these exaggerated volutes. Not the same with them, but they are still there. You see, exaggerated pilasters, and it's all non-functional, by the way. I mean, the entire architectural order of classicism turned out to be an ornamentational system and hiding the essentials of structure. This is a new trend, really, a new trend, the beginning of Baroque. In the chapel, here it is the chapel, bakın, A is the chapel. In the chapel, Michelangelo employed his great art of sculpture, his bodies, you see. By the way, Michelangelo's art of sculpture influenced his understanding of architecture, and vice versa. His understanding of architecture influenced his sculpture. This is very interesting. He is maybe the unique designer who was very, very successful in those two disciplines, architectural design and sculpture, art of sculpture. And his sculpturesque architecture is a sign of this quality. In this interior, we again have a number of similar features, great pediments, pilasters, exaggerated, and a decorative program hiding the structural system also, and the sculptures also in a way. But this dominating library is a great idea, and this vestibule and the library, and the staircase is most known, well-known design of Michelangelo as an initiator of Baroque, but within a Mannerist attitude, of course. Vignola, in his Church of San Ann in Vatican, introduced an oval church, now radical really attitudes. Here we have an oval church, but nothing more than that. I mean, probably you could also regard these pilasters, plasticity, heralding later Baroque, but every element here is classical, capitals, columns, and cornices, everything classical. There are no Baroque ornamentational devices, but the attitude is again Mannerist, in similar to Michelangelo, an exaggerated architectural vocabulary. And even grammar changed because we have an oval interior. Altogether, we have a new path now, designers following, but greatly related to earlier Renaissance. You cannot separate Baroque from Renaissance. Seeds of Baroque planted in Renaissance. Giulio Romano's Palazzo del Te or Palazzo Te in Mantua is a good case to illustrate Mannerism of the age. It is a palace now, not a villa, but a palace, a great compound with a garden finalized by a portico around it and a great square palace building with an inner courtyard, open inner courtyard. You can see this access leading to it from the portico to the gardens, to the garden at the center. What is striking in this are awkward, really awkward and strange elements employed. Now we are in front of this section here, from inside of the garden, looking at this, değil mi? Portico at the background. Yani şuradayız bakın, tam şuradayız. Buradan bakıyoruz. We look from here to the gate leading to the garden. There is the bridge here at the back, and portico can be seen further. A rhythm of pilasters exists as indicated here, which is very complex, very, very complex. Let me illustrate. For example, when you look at this entablature, you see partly deteriorated, spoiled, these falling stones. Why? I mean, and look at this strange niche opens between those two pilasters. I mean, they are so, I don't know, non-proportionally maybe introduced. And look at this keystone-like ornamentational device. And this one. Normally you would expect a keystone in an arch, but there is no arch here. Or an kind of very, very extraordinary arch-like, I don't know, entablature inserted within this pendentive. And look at this corner, an asymmetrical organization of devices. Bakın, this niche has no correspondence here. This niche starts from the corner. This niche comes after this window. I mean, you see here, there is everything done in order to break the order of the previous classicism. Architect playing with the forms in order to break the rules. There is a reaction. This reaction is mannerism. You react first, but you don't reach to a conclusion. You react. You just break the rules. This happens, you know. The postmodernism is as such. Everybody criticizes postmodernism. Oh no, 1980s, 1990s. Why? Every mannerist period was like this, you know. You first break the rules. You react. You send messages. I don't like you anymore. You become a classicist. Maybe you can say this, but cannot introduce something entirely new, original, but try to do it. Experience with the forms to create new forms and new systems in relation to them. Typical mannerism. You can find further details if you go on later on. In this bulbous keystone inserted in this entablature awkwardly of the pediment, as you can see, there's a problem. These great consoles, great exaggerated consoles carrying the pediment. Also, we have a problem. Nothing ordered in terms of Renaissance classicism here. Hanging keystones in the architecture, as I told you, is a great problem, really. And even the triglyph at the top comes down. It's a theatrical scene, you know. Yani, it's like a caricature. Mobbing, you know, kind of thing. Evet. In this facades by Romano in Mantua, you have the same distorted classical vocabulary, a pediment inserted in an arch, as you can see. Is a great case. And the proportions entirely changed. A great window not related to anything else in this facade, neither to the upper section nor lower. Right. Thank you. This is the end of Renaissance with Mannerism. Now I can go on with Baroque since we don't have much time. And I already opened Baroque presentation. I was looking at it during the break. Şimdi nasıl yapacağız bunu, bir dakika. Şunu kapatacak mıyız? Bunu paylaşmak istiyorum ama. Evet, let me share Baroque architecture if I can do. Görebiliyor musunuz?
Evet hocam.
Slide gösterisine geçiyorum. Görebiliyor musunuz?
Şu an slide gösterisine göremiyoruz hocam.
Onu dedim işte. Orada bir sorun oluyor ya hep. Bir daha yapacağım şimdi. Stop share diyorum. Diğer sonuçları kapatıyorum. Rönesans diyor. Kapatıyorum. Evet. Şunu da kapatıyorum arkadaşlar. Kapatabilirsem tabii. Ha, slide kütlesinde kalmış çünkü diğeri. Yani barok orada kalmış. Evet, sorun orada. Kaydet diyor. Kaydedeyim. Evet. Çünkü bazı şeyler ekledim. Evet, evet. Orada slide gösterisi kaldığı için Rönesans paylaşamadım. Şimdi paylaşacağım. Evet. Şimdi her şey yolundadır herhalde, değil mi? Hı?
Evet
Evet
hocam.
hocam şu anda
Teşekkür
geldi.
ederim. Teşekkür ederim. Initially, I would like to go on with Baroque culture, cultural background, historical information initially. Then I will go on with Baroque architecture. The word Baroque, what does it mean? It was invented by later critics, not intellectuals of 17th century. Rather than practitioners of it in the 17th and 18th centuries. This Baroque was invented later on. Evet. It's a French transliteration of a Portuguese phrase, Perola Barroca. It is a Portuguese name, which means irregular pearl. This is the origin of Baroque. Perola Barroca, irregular pearl. These kind of pearls were named as such. The term Baroque was initially used in a derogatory sense to underline the excess of its emphasis. Since this sort of pearls are irregular, and the critics of 18th century, 19th century and even 20th century, yani after Enlightenment, regarded Baroque as a deviation of classicism. What is classical as an idealized realm of knowledge and art and architecture in relation to it? Supposed to be spoiled, deteriorated by the artists of 17th century, mostly, and they named them Baroque in a derogatory sense, belittling their contributions. In particular, the term was used to describe its eccentric redundancy and noisy abundance of details, which sharply contrasted the clear and sober rationality of the Renaissance. In a similar way, Gothic was employed, invented in Italy, in order to name architecture of the North, yani işte Gothic, architecture of the Goths, yani işte barbars, architecture of the people of the forests. Then Gothic and Baroque share this feature. Both were invented by critics in order to belittle a past style in relation to the classicism, which was adored, which was put at a higher level than every other. This classicism, of course, is ancient classicism, the Greek and Roman, later Renaissance. Even I find it in the way scholars appreciate art and architecture of the modern period, 20th century. It's also a classicism, which is regarded superior, modern. I mean, as an architecture historian, of course, I have a different viewpoint than many others. Okay, what is at the background of şundan nasıl kurtulacaktım? Bir dakika, olmadı. Peki, kurtulamadık. Of Baroque culture. Actually, the popularity and success of the Baroque style was encouraged by the Catholic Church. It became the style of church, which had decided at the time of the Council of Trent, in response to the Protestant Reformation, that the arts should communicate religious themes in direct and emotional involvement. Then it was the propaganda, or rendered a propaganda medium of counter-reformation. Counter-reformation is against Protestant culture of the North. The Council of Trent proclaimed that architecture, painting, and sculpture had a role in conveying Catholic theology. Any work that might arouse carnal desire and worldly desire was inadmissible in church, while in depiction of Christ's suffering and explicit agony was desirable and proper. In an era when some Protestant reformers were destroying images of saints and whitewashing walls, Catholic reformers reaffirmed the importance of art, with special encouragement given to the images of the Virgin Mary. What is Council of Trent? It is the 19th Ecumenical Council of the Roman Catholic Church, held in 3 parts from 1545 to 1563. Prompted by the Reformation, the Council of Trent was highly important for its sweeping decrees on self-reform and for its dogmatic definitions that clarified virtually every doctrine contested by the Protestants. You would ask me, what is the direct relationship between Baroque and Catholic Church? I mean, you have been telling us that there is a gradual transformation in Renaissance leading to Baroque. There is a period of modernism, and was there really a direct relationship between these political religious developments and art style? It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, can we regard Baroque only as the art of the Catholic Church? Of course we cannot. Of course we cannot. Of course we cannot. For example, can we regard architect Sinan only as a propagandist of Sultan Süleyman, great Sultan? You know, his advertisement almost. Can we? Of course not. But of course we can also relate it with that. With that, of course. I mean, in culture history, one aspect is not a solution. One aspect is not an explanation. There are different aspects that contributed to the formation of something. In the different contexts, I have been trying to explain this, and later I will do in the presentation on Baroque. But now, at the moment, let's let it remain as such. It is a topic of discussion. Maybe later we can return. Counter-Reformation, also the Catholic Revival or Catholic Reformation, was the period of Catholic Revival beginning with the Council of Trent and ending at the close of the 30 Years' War at the middle of the 17th century. And then from the middle of the 16th to the middle of the 17th century, we have this period of Catholic Revival. And was initiated, Council of Trent, it began with the Council of Trent and finalized with wars, with 30-year war. It was initiated in response to the Protestant Reformation. The Counter-Reformation was a comprehensive effort composed of 4 major elements: ecclesiastical or structural reconfiguration, new religious orders, spiritual movements, and political dimensions, altogether composed Counter-Reformation. By means of them, Catholicism would like to impose itself on the world in competition with Protestant, I don't want to say religion, but Protestant faith. Such reforms included the foundation of seminars or seminaries for the proper, and seminaries and educational facilities for the proper training of priests in the spiritual life. It also involved political activities that included the Roman Inquisition. One primary emphasis of the Counter-Reformation was a mission to reach parts of the world that had been colonized as predominantly Catholic and also tried to convert our areas such as Sweden and England that were at one time Roman Catholic. These countries aimed to be taken back and rendered again Catholic countries. They were partly converted to Protestantism. Actually, Inquisition, yani Engizisyon, we know as such in Turkish, was a tool in the hands of the Catholic Church, and Inquisition courts were organized in order to judge the fate of the non-Catholics. And in Spain, for example, mostly hidden Catholics, I mean, who were in reality Muslims or Jews, were persecuted and killed after Inquisition courts. Unfortunately, this happens. And Baroque art. The Catholic Church was a leading arts patron across much of Europe. The goal of much art in the Counter-Reformation, especially in the Rome of Bernini and the Flanders of Peter Paul Rubens, was to restore Catholicism's predominance and centrality. This was one of the drivers of the Baroque style that emerged across Europe in the late 16th century. In areas where Catholicism predominated, architecture and painting, and to a lesser extent music, reflected Counter-Reformation goals. There's a concentration in the Christian ideals in this age, and church spent enormous amounts of money in the construction of new monasteries, new churches in towns, urban development programs, and so forth. And artists, architects were given tasks to contribute with their arts and architecture to this Counter-Reformation ideals and also propaganda against Protestantism. This is a fact. This is a fact. Can we relate whatever Baroque style directly with this? No, we cannot. But Baroque style employed by the popes in order to use it as a medium of propaganda. We have 5 more minutes. Buldum onu. Okay. 6th to 5th. Now is the symbol of this age. Another pope at the end of the 16th century. He hired Domenico Fontana to reshape Rome of medieval times. And he would like to create a new pilgrimage center, yani Haç Merkezi, in introducing great avenues between the main churches, like Santa Maria Maggiore, Santa Croce, San Lorenzo, linking them with streets, radiating streets, connecting the major churches and shrines in Rome by roads, not only benefited pilgrims, but it also reflected the papacy's desire to show the city's resilience during the Counter-Reformation. In doing so, Sixtus aimed to make the entire city a shrine. From the single church to the city then, they regarded habitation a shrine. This is a fact. Like the mosques on the hills of Istanbul, we have now great churches reconstructed partly and avenues opened combining these churches. One is here from Piazza Popolo to the center of Rome. Another one here, another one. I will be showing you them. There is, I credit this slide for you. Piazza Popolo, a street leads you to Santa Maria Maggiore at the middle, Santa Croce at the end. If you turn right at this point, you reach to San Giovanni in Laterano. If you turn right at this stage, you reach to Santa Agnese. If you turn, left, Santa Agnese, right, Sant'Andrea al Quirinale, a Baroque church here. San Giovanni is a Byzantine medieval church reconstructed. Santa Maria Maggiore as well. And many other church accessible by means of this avenue. Actually, planning of Rome in the 17th century is after the organization of the church. Evet. The main thoroughfare is this one, leading from Piazza Popolo to Santa Croce. This map of Rome by Brambilla includes the 7 central churches, like the 7 hills of Istanbul. There in Rome were 7 great churches. This is the reason why Rome and Istanbul are compared in terms of the topography and building complexes. One is a Christian city, the other is a Muslim city. Pilgrims would follow these routes, these avenues to reach those great churches during pilgrimages. Then Rome turned out to be a great papal city, a capital city, with its great Baroque church. Evet. 7 pilgrim churches of Rome as such: St. Peter's, St. Giovanni Laterano, San Paolo fuori le Mura, Santa Maria Maggiore, San Lorenzo fuori le Mura, Santa Croce in Gerusalemme, San Sebastiano. These are the churches, 7 in number, drawn in this picture, as you can see, which are the major Baroque churches. Majority of them are reconstructed, except maybe St. Peter's, and as I told you, San Andrea al Quirinale, and a few others. They are old basilicas reconstructed. Okay, this is the end of today's lecture. I hope you enjoyed. Nice topics, really. I like them, and every year I learn something new while teaching. This is good. Any question? Any comments, recommendation? There is a deadline for a homework, I suppose, Orçun, değil mi?
Yes, hocam, it is today.
Review of the paper we sent, the book chapter.
Yes, hocam.
You are also responsible in reading Le Corbusier, the book on Le Corbusier. Many times I told you this. We will be asking a question in the final examination. Next week I suppose will be the last, değil mi? Last lecture. Son sunuş olacak haftaya, değil mi?
Hocam, I guess we have 1 week more, but we need to
Yani jüriler haftaya değil mi?
Hayır hocam. Yok.
Ondan sonraki hafta mı?
Jüriler hocam onuyla başlayan haftada olması gerekiyor.
19'unda son ders var hocam.
Bir bakayım.
Yani 5 Ocak sonra ara, sonra 19 Ocak'ta son ders.
Şimdi 29'undayız arkadaşlar. 5 Ocak'ta bir ders yapabilirim haftaya. Sorun yok. 12'si çizim haftası dedikleri hafta değil mi?
Evet.
12'sinde de
Ondan
ben
sonraki haftaya bir ders koymuşuz.
19'unda olmayacak ders. Zaten onu ben hallettim şimdi artık. O programda bir sorun yok. 19'u jüri haftası değil mi? 19'u.
Evet
Anlıyor
hocam.
muyum? Tamam. Dolayısıyla 2 ders daha yapacağız. Ben biraz hızlanmıştım. O zaman şey yapabileceğiz. Süper. 18. yüzyıl Osmanlı yapabileceğiz. Hem de iyi olacak Barok'tan sonra koymak onu. Çünkü Barok etkiler var orada. We're gonna have 18th century Ottoman architecture on the 12th. Next week I will finalize. Nasıl oldu biz yetiştirdik bu dersi? Bazen şaşırıyorum kendime yani. O kadar kaybediyorum kendimi anlatırken. Bitti diyorum. Bu dersi asla bitiremeyeceğim ben. Sonra ne oluyor? Allah yardım ediyor. Bir şekilde bu ders tamamlanıyor yani. Yine öyle olacak. 12'sinde Osmanlı ile bitireceğiz arkadaşlar. Sınavınız da artık 26'sında olduğu hafta olacak herhalde. Yani o hafta içinde bir gün veya ondan sonraki hafta. Bilmiyorum. Bana sordular sınav tarihini. İkisini dedim. Birim alamıyorum valla işte. Bir tarih verdim ama o haftada sınav olacak. Onu sonra anlarsınız. Okay. Anything you would like to learn? Next week and the week after, we're gonna have 2 more lectures. Next week, I will be finalizing Baroque. The week after, I will be dealing with the 18th century Ottoman architecture, then completing our schedule. Next year, next year, spring semester, değil mi? Elvan Hoca will deal with 19th century. then this gap will be filled. There will be no problem. You can go on with 19th century after my 18th century architectural presentation. Okay, thank you very much. Nesrin, Orçun, size de çok teşekkürler.
Biz teşekkür ederiz hocam.
Görüşmek üzere. Kendinize iyi bakın.
Görüşürüz Orçun. Görüşürüz arkadaşlar.
Görüşürüz hocam. Görüşürüz arkadaşlar.